Okay, hi everyone, welcome back to this live stream for Windows Server 2003. So I'll just go here, share my screen. So configuring wins. In the previous chapter, you learned that NetBIOS works by broadcasting network resource information, such as which shares a server offers and where the domain master browser is, so that any client can hear what its peers have to offer. Broadcast works okay for smaller networks, but they generate a lot of unnecessary and undesirable clutter in larger networks. Because NetBIOS packets aren't routable, the problem is even worse. Not only do all those broadcasts clutter the network, they don't even do any good because only machines on the local subnet can hear them. Microsoft solved the routability problem by offering NetBIOS over TCP/IP, also known as NBT. However, NBT still sends out broadcasts. Although NBT broadcasts do allow NetBIOS style name resolution on TCP/IP networks, Microsoft's designers realized that it was possible to come up with an even better solution, and the Windows Internet Name Service WINS was created. WINS listens to NBT broadcasts and collects them in a central source. In this role, it effectively serves as a clearinghouse for NetBIOS naming information. If your clients are configured to use a WINS server, they can resolve NBT addresses without using broadcast. This significantly decreases the load on the network and actually makes NBT a viable, although dying solution on larger networks. In the following sections, you will see how to configure WINS client information node types. Before we get into the specifics of how to configure a WINS client, you should understand some terminology you need to know. You know that NBT typically uses broadcasts unless your clients are configured to use a WINS server. More specifically, the method that the client uses depends upon the client node type as listed in Table 2.1. The node type is determined by the NBT settings that you configure or don't configure. In the WINS tab, a client's node type can be altered in the registry, but you should use the DHCP or the default settings whenever possible. So we'll just go through it here. Table 2.1, NetBIOS node types, node type description, bnode broadcast. Broadcast NBT queries for name registration and resolution. The default for Windows 2000 XP and Windows Server 2003 client machines not configured with WINS. pnode peer node uses a NetBIOS name server or a WINS server to resolve NetBIOS names and does not use broadcasts. mnode mixed, similar to bnode by default. If it cannot resolve a name, reverts to pnode. hnode hybrid, similar to pnode by default, and if it cannot resolve a name, reverts to bnode. The default for Windows 2000 XP and Windows Server 2003 client machines that are configured with WINS. Configuring WINS client information. The WINS tab offers you a small group of controls for configuring how, if at all, your clients use WINS for name resolution. So you can see here, figure 2.5, the WINS tab of the advanced TCP IP settings dialog box. The controls are as follows. WINS address. This list and its related controls show you which WINS servers you have defined for this client. By default, this list will be empty, so you have to manually add WINS servers to it if you want to use WINS. As with DNS, the WINS code will send WINS resolution requests to the servers on this list in the order of their appearance. You can add, remove, and change server addresses with the buttons below the list, and you change the ordering of the servers by selecting a server and using the up, down arrow buttons along the list's right side. You can have up to 12 WINS servers on the list, LM hosts. The next group, which falls immediately below the WINS address list group, controls whether or not old-style LM hosts file is used as a source for address resolution information. The LM hosts file is a text file that contains net bias name to address mappings. Computers can reference this file to resolve names to IP addresses, or they can use traditional broadcast or WINS methods. The Enable LM Hosts lookup checkbox controls whether or not Windows Server 2003 will use the computer name to IP mappings in the LM Hosts file before querying a WINS server. When you check this box, LM Hosts lookups are enabled for all connections that are using TCP IP, not just the ones whose properties you're editing. The Import LM Host button allows you to read the contents of a file into the WINS name cache, which is handy if you want to load a set of name mappings without keeping a file around on disk. Net bias setting. The final controls are the three radio buttons at the bottom of the dialog box. They control whether net bias over TCP IP is active at all. In the past, NetBEUI was the only transport that could carry net bias traffic, but it wasn't routable and had poor performance on large networks. As you saw earlier, Windows Server 2003 includes support for NBT, although we expect its use to diminish as networks move more toward pure TCP IP. Here's what each button does. Default uses net bias setting from the DHCP server button forces this particular client to use the DHCP server setting instead of manual WINS setting or the LM host file. If this button is not selected, whatever setting is enforced will override the DHCP server setting. The Enable Net Bias over TCP IP button is selected to override a DHCP setting. It allows this client to exchange net bias traffic with servers using TCP IP as a transport. The Disable Net Bias over TCP IP button turns off NBT, which is handy when you want to totally rid your network of all net bias traffic, even when it's encapsulated. Exercise 2.3, configuring Windows Server 2003 machine as a WINS client. So 1, select Start Control Panel Network Connections. Right-click the local area connection icon and choose Properties. If you have more than one LAN adapter, choose the one you want to configure. 3, the local area connection properties dialog box appears. Select Internet Protocol TCP IP. From this connection uses the following items list. 4, click the Properties button. The Internet Protocol TCP IP properties dialog box appears. 5, click the Advanced button. The Advanced TCP IP settings dialog box appears. 6, click the WINS tab. 7, click the Add button. When the TCP IP WINS server dialog box appears, enter the IP address of your WINS server and click the Add button. The first WINS server on the list should be the server physically closest to the client machine. You can enter additional WINS server addresses and reorder the servers as necessary if you like. 8, click OK to close the advanced TCP IP settings dialog box. 9. Click OK to close the Internet Protocol TCP IP properties dialog box. 10. Click OK to close the local area connection properties dialog box. Configuring network bindings. A network binding has links. A network binding links a protocol to an adapter so that the adapter can carry traffic using that protocol. For example, if we say TCP IP is bound to the onboard Ethernet port on our laptop, we're telling you a few things. TCP IP is installed. Our onboard Ethernet port has a driver that supports TCP IP, and the adapter is configured to send and receive TCP IP traffic. In Chapter 1, Understanding Windows Server 2003 Networking, you read about the NDIS driver specification and its benefits. One of those benefits is the ability to bind more than one protocol to a NIC. That's how your Windows Server 2003 machine can run TCP IP, NetBEUI, and AppleTalk at the same time, even if it has only one network card. Windows Server 2003 automatically creates bindings when you install a protocol or when you check or uncheck the checkboxes in the properties dialog box of a particular NIC. You can change these bindings manually. For example, it's commonly considered good practice to unbind NetBEUI and NWLink from adapters that are connected to or visible from the internet. You can access the Windows Server 2003 binding list from within the Network Connections folder, which can be opened by selecting Start Control Panel, right-clicking Network Connections and selecting Open from the pop-up menu. Click on a local NIC like the standard local area connection item. Choose the advanced menu and select Advanced Settings. You will see the Advanced Settings dialog box shown in Figure 2.6. This dialog box is divided into two distinct areas. So you can see here Figure 2.6, adjusting bindings with the Advanced Settings dialog box. The connections list shows all the connections available on your computer. They're listed in the order that they'll be used for services. For example, in Figure 2.6, you can see that TCP IP services, as well as everything else, will first use the LAN connection if the requested action can't be taken there. The services will use a remote access connection. Instead, you can change the order in which connections are used by selecting a connection and using the up and down arrows button to the right of the list. The bindings list shows you which protocols and services are bound to the selected connection. For example, Figure 2.6 shows that the file and printer sharing for Microsoft Networks and clients from Microsoft Network Services are bound to the LAN adapter, and that the NWLink and TCP IP protocols are bound to the file and printer sharing from Microsoft Networks and clients from Microsoft Networks Services. What this dialog box tells you is which services are available on a connection. Beneath each service, you'll see a list of which protocols that service can use. Checking and unchecking service has the same effect as checking or unchecking items in the adapter properties dialog box. The one benefit is that you can turn individual protocols on or off on a per service basis. You can also control the order in which protocols are used. This is a valuable optimization because many protocols have some sort of built-in retry behavior. Changing the binding so that the most frequently used protocols are at the top of the list for each service means that the services never waste time trying the wrong protocol. Instead, they'll try the most likely choice first, falling back to the other protocols only if the first protocol fails. So I'm going to leave it here today for this live stream. If you like listening, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you.